he's always been involved in Native American affairs, and some of the things he's done since he retired even have been pretty important. He was involved in the International Native Caucus. He was a Northern Michigan representative in that, and he's been involved in the ecumenical affairs, and is based out of New York. The caucus was based out of Washington, D.C. He's a veteran and pretty well respected Native American in Northern Michigan. Here he's a speaker of the language, and it just has a wealth of knowledge in our local history, and he's here to share a little bit with us tonight. Maybe he'll tell us some regular stories other than just history too, if we can get him to do that. I'd like to welcome Jay Albert.
Thank you. I hope to be worthy of such nice things that you've said about me. But I'm glad to be able to be with you tonight. I was a bit concerned, perhaps maybe I wouldn't be able to because of failing health at my age, why it can happen. I'm 82 years old and still getting around. I'm glad to say that I have retained my sanity, but the old frame is breaking down, which will come to all of us if we live long enough. The Indian humor is not easily recognized by the average person, but they have a humor of their own. I was attending a seminar for Native Americans at Kansas City University a number of years ago, and there was a very talented Indian artist there who did speaking in illustrations, and he depicted on the screen with charcoal a throng of Native American Indians on the shores of the Atlantic, and he apparently was the chief, as we've come to call their leader, and he pointed in the horizon and he said, "Look." And there on the horizon were 3 dots. The world famous the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina coming to the shores. And he said, "Look, boat people." And so it sounds rather humorous, but nevertheless true. As you perhaps all know, long before it was called America, the Native American dwelt in this great land. They were divided into families into tribes, and tribes into nations. And each family had what they call a totem, which is pronounced in English totem. And there they had gatherings as associated with comparable to civic organizations that we have in our day. And from tribes they were divided up into nations. And they knew their boundaries. They knew the names of every river, every mountain, every valley, clear across this vast continent. And that is the way they lived. and peacefully, as we would like to speculate. Of course, we know that they had wars among themselves, which is only human nature. But to what extent, no one knows. And thus, that was the scene when the first Europeans began to arrive. They came here in the name of God and religion. And the native Indians, of course, were as astonished and surprised as they perhaps were. And the colonists or the pilgrims stayed on the ship of the Mayflower that first year while the men and the rowboats went ashore to build log cabins and whatnot. But then a pestilence occurred, and the native Indians told them, you will have to have some of this herbal medicine to sustain you. And those who refused didn't make it. And over half of what I have read, over half of those first load of people who came here perished. They died that first year. Those who returned to Europe announced to the Europeans that this world, this new world as they called it, was unoccupied. It was up for grabs. Anyone could conquer it. And that was the struggle from the very beginning. And there's more truth than laughter through those three dots on the horizon, because the things that Columbus did are not very complimentary either when research is done as to what he did to the Native Americans. And thus, that was, as I said, was the setting. And that is the way they lived, and they welcomed anyone who came here, as we are told by our peers and elders. And finally, the missionaries began to arrive. First, it was the Jesuits, France. We call them Meketakunya, which means black robe. And the black robes were the first to arrive. And they started to convert the American Indian. And he was quite successful. But a lot of it, too, was by force. And in the early 1800s, by that time, the Protestant Board of Missions, which was established in Boston, began to send their missionaries into the interior of the country. And it was in the late 1790s. The exact date is not known. But by that time, the Presbyterians had established a school at Bay Mills near Sault Ste. Marie. And the school was for Indian children. And there, a youngster by the name of Peter Greensky was enrolled. And in time, mastered the English language and finished his course of study, which was religious. And his intention was to start a mission of his very own. And he came with a group of followers to the lower peninsula and settled in the Leelanau area, Northport, which is Northport, and Sutton's Bay, most Traverse City in that area. He settled there. But for some unknown reason, he wasn't quite satisfied with the sedate Presbyterians. And he wanted to be more charismatic. And he came in northward and finally arrived at Zidane, which is Pine River and Pine Lake, Charlevoix. And he landed at what is now Oyster Bay, and settled there and camped, and lived in that area for a number of years. And he selected this area, which is about a mile from Oyster Bay, up on a bluff. And there he selected that bluff to establish this church. And the church is now known, and the area is now known as Green Sky Hill. How many of you have been there? So not very many. Well, you have a historic trip ahead of you if you ever are in that area. And I think there were about 9 or 10 families involving around 30 people. And he selected this area, and they saw the great beauty and the virgin timber, and there were also other trees, and they bent those trees and they formed a circle. In those days, those trees were just mere saplings, and they bent them in odd shapes and then tied basswood thongs to hold them in place. And the trees, which are still standing, many of them, are still there in this odd and curious shape. And the circle is still there. And there he had his home. They built his house. And their first services were held there. The others had dwellings. They were called Waganigan, which means a dome-shaped building and covered with elm bark. And those days there was plenty of elm and huge. You could have a wide strip of bark just from one tree. And that's how they lived. And then they saw the need for a building. And so around 1833, they commenced the church and worked on it. The largest trees were felled of white pine. They are almost 40, around 38 feet long, and almost 2 feet on the base. And they don't taper one bit. That building, those logs can be seen today. The church has been, when it was completed, has been in constant use. And that is the way it was in the earliest times. And they were notched and snugly and then and the cracks filled with some kind of a moss to keep out the elements. And they have dowels that run from the top of the logs down to the foundation, so they'll never give. And they just had a dirt floor, old plank pews, and just had hides and things like that at the windows where to keep out the elements, and just a flat roof. But they kept on working, and by 1840 they had completed that much. And they kept on working at it and working at it till finally they had a gable. And it was formally dedicated July 6, 1877. That's when it was, but they had worshipped in it since 1833. And the church has grown. And it was hard from the beginning to retain your culture and your heritage after you have embraced Christianity. And many of the Native Americans have retained both. I personally have remembered some of the teachings. I recall when I was a child that we had great reverence and fear of the thunder. And we were always told to say our prayers. And also, the eagle is considered the king of all birds in flight. But the owl is given sort of a second choice. But nevertheless, he is known for his wisdom. And you were never to say anything derogatory toward owls. You were to respect them. And I recall one evening as I was a married man and had 2 boys, and we had the meetings outdoors. It was in the early evening, and there is a grove of trees all around us. And I saw this owl come out of the woods, and it was just not high, much higher than above the heads of the congregation. And I immediately crossed myself remembering what my grandmother thought, just because I saw that owl. And there isn't anything wrong with it, but I have just retained it, and so it is throughout the country. Native Americans have retained their culture, trying to, and their heritage. Well, Green Sky Hill had prospered, and it was not until about 1920 that the gates were open, so to speak, so that anyone could go there to worship. Because in my youth, the language of the native Hotala language was used exclusively. And I, of course, have retained that all my life. But then they joined the Methodist Conference and became part of the Methodist Church. And they, in turn, of course, have sent their officers. So now we're bilingual. We use both languages on Sunday. I might just put in a plug here. The services are at 9:30 every Sunday. and both languages are used. And I have found that in trying to give a history of Michigan, are there any questions? Surely you must. I'd like to know what you think too. Yes?
Did any of the rivers or mountains or anything retain the Indian names in the English?
Oh, yes.
Like what the Snake River and
Oh, yes, yes, and the Kennebec River, that means snake. And Chicago means, which is the big city of Chicago, that's skunk. It's the name of the skunk. And other names, unusual names, and our great highways were originally Indian paths throughout
what about like the Smoky Mountains?
the Smoky Mountains. Probably, I don't know, that would be into another tribe of Indian people. And like I said at the beginning, we were divided into tribes. And each tribe had its own distinct language. And I couldn't understand a Sioux Indian any more than you could. Anyone else? Yes?
Now this cultural center, I heard they opened up at Central Michigan at Mount Pleasant.
Yes.
Is that something to look into? What do you think of it? Together?
That's the Isabella area, the Chippewa River.
It's supposed to be right on campus somewhere.
Yes. We have one here locally at Northport, at Chabot Town. Is that what you're talking about?
No, there's a new one that opened up. They just dedicated it recently at Central Michigan University in Mount Pleasant.
Oh, well, what does it do there? What is the purpose of it?
Well, I was
Is that just
watching public television the other day and Central Michigan was on. I just caught the tail end of it. They were saying that just opened up. It was one of the, at least the person speaking said it was one of the better ones as far as being original.
Oh,
It displays the artwork.
oh, I see, yes. I think and another one will open in November, I believe, in Grand Rapids, which will be for the entire state on Indian art. And you have a fine one here, which displays Indian art occasionally.
Down in the waterfront?
McEwen?
McEwen.
Yes. Uh-huh. Anyone else?
So Peter Greensky broke with the Presbyterians and struck out on his own.
Yes, yes.
And basically built this thing, this missionary effort,
Yes,
purely from amongst his people.
yes, yes.
That is uniquely Ottawa endeavor.
Yeah, yes, he was of Ottawa descent. And there are two, not just necessarily language, but, what do you call this?
Dialect?
Dialect, yes. The Ojibwe, that means running away. And the Ottawa, that means to trade and to sell. To Tawa. Ottawa in there. That's a storekeeper. And then in those early days, the Native Indians, Native American Indians, they were of a migratory nature, much like people are today. Many of them lived up here in the north, north country. And when it got cold, well, they went south where it was warm, using the Lake Michigan as a great waterway. The children and older people and women were out in the water, and men were inland or along the shore carrying what wares they had to carry, and later with horses. And that's the way they traveled. And generally they would go as far south as Chicago, because Chicago was a vast swamp, and it was many fur animals were in the swamp, and they would settle there for the winter. When spring came, they would reverse. They would come as far north where there was maple sugar and syrup, and stay there long enough, and it was what is now the Benton Harbor and St. Joseph area. They would come that far, and the village was called Macatawa. It was, I don't know what but it still has retained its name, I don't know. And then they'd come north, farther north, and they would settle where they could harvest birch bark. You harvest birch bark in May. That's when it's the finest birch bark can be obtained. Then they would come back to their summer home and put in garden of corn and beans and squash. And they had what they called sungrun, which means root cellar. And there they would store food when they left in the fall, so that when they returned in the spring, it would be there, hopefully. And that's the way it was. And there were other areas right here in our midst that has so much history, with the Octowahin, Larb Croach, and Middle Village, as they call it, and Crooked Tree, and which we take for granted. But there again, where there was the main settlement of the Ojibwe in the Ottawa Indians, and have left their mark, which is somewhat less visible than it was when I first saw it as a youngster. Anyone else with a question? Yes.
In the book you read about the Ojibwe pony. Is there anybody that still breeds that horse?
The Indian pony?
Yeah.
Not local.
No.
No. They used to have the only one I knew of personally was on High Island out here. They had Indian ponies. They were wild too. But the Michigan Humane Society stepped in and stopped all of that, rounded up all the horses, and they were all sold. There are no more horses there that I know of.
What years did they round them all up?
I believe around 1917 or 1918, not too long ago. And as far as I know, but then the island people have a great history also. But they occupied all those islands, but with the coming of Europeans, they were all dispossessed, and no one is there that I know of Indian descent today. I hesitated about coming tonight because I had kind of a bad day yesterday, and since you are the history class. I don't know how many of you are involved in the in-depth and study of American history. But I went to school also, and in my lifetime I experienced some of the saddest things I've ever learned. As I look back now, at the time I couldn't understand. But this racial thing has developed to where I don't know what's going to happen all over the world. I lived in Iran for a couple of years, Persia. They were having it all the time. And the Arabs and the Egyptians. I stayed one winter in Cairo. Beautiful place. But it's so hard to understand. Their problems are religious. What about our country? What's our problem? What's bugging us? I would like to know. But in the early days of my own life, I recall I was the only Native American child in the room. It was my first year in school. And for some reason or another, our teacher was transferred to a different town, or I don't know what the reason is. Anyway, she had been with us a few months until she had to leave. Well, she had a little farewell program, and her way of saying goodbye as she went up and down the aisle and kissed every student in their seats. When she came to me, she didn't. And why didn't she? Well, I found out later that she didn't like Indian children. Now, that happened 75 years ago, and I never have forgotten it, because I could hardly keep the tears were coming to my eyes because I was hurt. And as of today, I think the situation is not much better. I would like to read from this book of the chronological history of our country of Michigan of the 18th century, starting with the 1700s. This book is authenticated, and it is the truth. During what is known as the French era, 1720 to 61, many Ottawa moved to La Crosse, just north of Little Travis Bay, at what became Meadow Village and later Goodhart. La Crosse, the crooked tree, later came to be described to describe the entire coastal settlement from the bay to Cross Village. The subsequent migration shifted the center of Ottawa population from eastern to western Michigan and brought the first band of Grand Traverse Bay, Michigan, under French and British rule, was a remote portion of a remote colony, but it was not so remote as to prevent Native Americans residing in Michigan from being swept up in European power struggles. The 18th century produced the first of a series of promises to protect historic Indian lands, promises that were proclaimed and then breached. Detroit was founded by Antoine de Lamont Cadillac, the white settlement of the northwestern Lower Peninsula area that now is the service area of the Grand Traverse Wabanna Indians was more than a century away. Cadillac used brandy to help manage Indians who supplied furs. There were British-inspired raids on Fort Detroit by more than 1,000 Fox and Sauk Indians. Ottawa and Buren returned from hunting expeditions to aid the townspeople of Fort Detroit. The outbreak of the French and Indian War, which was the North American phase of the 7 Years' War, deterred settlements of Detroit and vicinity. Although removed from the major battle zone, Michigan was drawn into the war. A new and unsettling era was ushered in for Michigan Indians when the British assumed control of the French surrender of Fort Detroit. A symbol of alliance was shattered when the British banned exchange of gifts from Great Lakes Indians and sharply curtailed the amounts of guns and ammunition they would receive. A long period of shifting relationships and other uncertainties was ahead. And in 1762, Ottawa Chief Pontiac united other tribes and led an unsuccessful effort to drive the British from the Indian lands. This was an important year in Indian history. The Treaty of Paris of 1763. How many of you know about the Treaty of Paris?
Treaty of what?
Of Paris.
Paris.
Paris, France. It was one of the most, I'll just tell you about it. It was the most important treaty. The British lost, the French, the Indians took part with the French against the British, and they lost the war. Consequently, England took over all of Canada and all along the border. That's why Michigan was always such a controversial issue. And that was called the Treaty of Paris. And a royal proclamation said Indians should be allowed to remain in their territories, and signing of the treaty in February ended the French and Indian War. France lost North American mainland and its possessions. The Treaty of Paris of 1763 was the first of many in Europe treaties that introduced the notion of sovereignty to Native Americans, establishing the principle that Indian land could not be taken without a treaty. It was written that utmost good faith shall always be observed towards the Indians. Their lands and property shall never be taken from them without their consent, and then in their property rights and liberty shall never be invaded or disturbed. That's where we live today. Right here. What happened? Who took it? Now, this probably to you sounds a bit sarcastic, but I don't mean it in that direction, nor do we as American Indians of today like to dwell on the bitterness of the past. But it did happen, but you will not read it in high school history, nor in college for that matter, I don't know. But the facts are there. That's how Michigan became a state. Treaties were made and promptly violated. And the border, the boundaries were moved increasingly from the Atlantic seaboard westward to the Ohio River at one point, and there was no further invasion, but it kept on and on and on until the entire continent was overtaken by force. And it seems to me it has taken the Native American 100 years or more to regain any degree of recognition. It has started now, and I believe that they will prove to the world they are right. These things are all available to anyone who would like to do some researching in the records kept in Washington and in our own state too. And the boundary line for our area here is the Grand River, which flows across the state through Grand Rapids and in that area, and all of the land north of that line is the home of the Ojibwa and Ojibwe. Are there any questions? Any more questions?
Why did the Indians unite?
What?
Why did the Indians unite with the French instead of the British? I mean, what were the reasons why?
The French were understanding, and they were kind to the Indians. They respected Indian women. They even married Indian women in the church, the Roman Catholic Church, and started a whole new race of people. Almost all Canadians are French and Indian as of today. I guess a lot of you know that. The British were the arrogant, I am better than you are attitude. That is what the attitude that they took. When they had constitutional conventions after the colonies won their independence from the British, they began to formulate their own form of government. These constitutional conventions were held at Philadelphia. We are told that George Washington rode from his home for 3 days by horseback in order to reach Philadelphia to attend these constitutional conventions. And other delegates were of the English aristocracy former English lords and other high positions in England. The Native American who owned the land was not invited. Why? It was a nation, but they were not invited. It was not until the United States had its Constitution, then laws were enacted to recognize the Native people, at least on paper. They were driven out. Mostly in Georgia and then in the Carolinas, the Cherokees, driven west. They were driven out of here too. Are there any other questions?
How much did the white people pay for the land around Lake Charlevoix in the Charlevoix area?
I don't know.
The sewing machine story.
Oh, there were attempts to, the book states that it was against the law to cheat Indians or to gain land by fraud. They had those laws, but there were ways of getting around that too. But in that area where one of the most exclusive resorts are in Charlevoix today, it's called the Chicago Club. Maybe some of you have seen it. Where some of the finest homes and some of the wealthiest people in the country spend their summer vacations there. And we are told that there was an enterprising man among the Indians, and by that time I guess the village had been established. But anyway, this Indian man bought a sewing machine for his wife. And, well, he kept up with by payments. He kept the payments up as long as he could. And when he couldn't make the payment, the Indian seller said, all right, you give me your land and I'll give you that sewing machine. Well, he wanted the sewing machine, I guess. But in exchange for what now was an 18-hole golf course and the Chicago Club. It was so one-sided, too broad. I don't think you could do that today. But those are the things that existed among people who should know better, among the heads of government. What do we think, and what do you think of the situation in Africa? Those unknown, they're hideous and black and all that from our standpoint, but they're human beings, and those were their lands, their ancestral lands. I spent some time in Cape Town, South Africa in my life. At that time, even the United States had its rules. We have segregation laws in the United States, not toward the American Indians, but toward Negroes, black people. Well, they were bad enough. When I saw them the first time here in the United States, I thought it was cruel and humiliating. But 50, 60 years ago when I was in South Africa, I never saw anything so cruel. And the arrogant attitude of non-blacks. But on the other hand, Judging by the number of half-castes you see on the streets in Cape Town, the blacks and whites must get together somehow.
Don't you think the situation in South Africa is very different than here? In that in South Africa there are
There
problems.
is a similarity. I'm not familiar enough with the political end of the situation, but I can't help but feel a somewhat understanding toward black people in that respect. In this country, I don't know what to think about black people. I am neither white nor black. But I think they're getting a better deal here in our country than Native American Indians. The population. There are more black people in the city of Chicago than there are Native American Indians in the whole United States. And many of them have high positions, which is fine. I also had my feeling toward my own people as I grew up and saw things on television, and all I saw Native American Indians was buckskin, leather, and feathers whenever any show was on the screen. And my first assignment from New York when I was a kid was Phoenix, Arizona. And I had visions of seeing primitive Indians and people who were backward and all of that. Those are the things that I saw envisioned in my own mind. But when I got out there and all the delegates began to arrive, we were quartered in one of the finest hotels in Phoenix, had large meeting rooms where we can gather. And I never saw such elegance of ladies and gentlemen, men and women who are in the professions, intellectually, doctors, attorneys, nurses, teachers, what have you, and they are all Native Americans. So what you see locally of some disreputable person, generally it's publicized, oh, he's an Indian. Well, that might be so, but he didn't get drunk because he was Indian. Anyone else? Well, I know you, because I talked for quite a while. I do wish you all the success, you young people. I hope that you will come to understand in your own mind the position that the native man, woman, and child had on this continent long before it was called America. We are proud of our country. This is our home. Some Indians say when they are arrested, well, why don't you deport me? Send me back to the old country. You have no place to go. But that is the situation. And as the Frenchman says it, vos chance, je t'aime, je vous aime. Thank you.
question, but I just wanted to mention this to you. I belong to the First United Methodist Church
Yes.
in Onway.
Yes.
And every year, we have a special Sunday, which happened to be this last Sunday, that's dedicated to Native American Indians, Native Americans. And they always have a really nice service. The music and the sermon and everything is geared towards speaking to the Native Americans and what's happening in the United States with them today. I just wondered if you knew that.
Yes, we observed it. We are Methodists.
Uh-huh.
And spiritually, like any other group of people or any community, your spiritual life is a continual growth. You never can reach perfection. And many Native American Indians are dedicated toward that spirituality. And I know the church is doing all it can to educate so that Native Americans can become ministers and bishops or any of the high positions that it demands. I have to know and thank you for reminding me. Yes.
Where were you going to school when your first day with the teacher?
Charlevoix. I was born in Charlevoix. My mother was born in Charlevoix, Green Sky Hill, in East Township, Susan Lee. My mother was born there. My grandmother was born in Chicago. And on, way back. I was 14 years old when my great-grandmother was still living, and she died that year. And she endowed in the youth with us children a lot of stories which I have kept here, And I went to school in the local school at Charlevoix, in the grade school, and then I was sent to a boarding school for Indian children at Mount Pleasant, and I was there 3 years. And then came back to Charlevoix and graduated from high school there.
Jay, did you have a choice to go to that boarding school,
No,
or they?
it was a government decree.
Mhm. And how long did you have to stay?
I was there 3 years.
3 whole years.
You see, this sounds unreal, but I'm sure you know it. The government in the early days, during the expansion of the country, the Native American Indians were always in the way. They were always in the way. Consequently, they had great wars with them. You know that. And then finally, the government, they were going to get rid of them through genocide, annihilation. That was their plan. And many of them were driven off west of the Mississippi River, never to return again. And then when that didn't work, then they set up government schools throughout the United States. And Mount Pleasant, Michigan was one of them. And I went there. And so in 1933, the government then decided it had made a mistake. So they decided, well, we'll close all the schools because the Indian people should retain their own language, their own culture. Consequently, there's a whole generation of people that lost what they should have retained. And they are now just beginning to come back. And gather up where they left off. That's the way it was. Fortunately for me, the language I spoke at home was it. That came first. And I have never forgotten. Even though it was forbidden, we used to go out in the woods, so a group of us, and where we couldn't be seen, and laugh and talk it. So it's hard to really suppress a whole race of people. They have done very well, however. The European has intermarried and produced half-castes, half-breeds, or they used to call them. But most half-breeds in the early days never left their Indian heritage. But they were the interpreters in earliest times.
Fred, do you think we could get a conversation?
Not much of one.
How much time do you have?
Oh, we have.
Lots.
I don't have I don't want to remember all that.
Councils.
We have past your bedtime.
Do you want to take a break and continue?
Well, I think there'll be a little bit more.
Okay,
Oh,
we'll take a break.
God, no, wait till they be. Well, I hardly know how to begin. You have to make allowances for having done this for quite some time, but I really haven't forgotten, and I'm going to help somebody else again tomorrow. So maybe it's a good practice for me. The Indian people do have a sense of humor. We're quite dry in our way of thinking, I want to say. And they have had some very wonderful, good times together. Even the slightest inflection of a sound of a language can change the meaning of a word. Now you take the endings of the Ojibwe language and the endings in Ottawa. They're similar. I can speak and understand Ottawa and Ojibwe. The story goes that there are a group of two distinct groups of ladies who were having somewhat of a discussion, a Bible study. And they came upon a passage in the Bible which they didn't quite understand. So the Protestant ladies said, well, when the minister comes, we'll ask him. And the way you say that, na is the end of that sentence. Okay? The Catholic lady says, well, when the priest comes, we'll ask him. And the way you say that, min is the ending. When you translate that literally by the Ottawa language, these women were saying, when the minister comes, we'll ask him. These other ladies were saying when the priest comes, will ask him for what, but they were really saying, when the priest comes, we'll smell him. Just by that little end. So you have to be careful. You really have to have a thorough knowledge of these languages because of their complexity. We have no R's. If you want to use a word that has an R in it, you substitute an L, and B becomes Q, and all that to remember, you know. But after you've mastered it, no problem. I can speak in my language, and I can speak English and think in my own language. It's that easy for me now. Always has been since I learned to speak it first. And there are a lot of amusing things that people do, Indian people do to laugh and talk. And the story goes that, as I told you, I think I'll change my mind. I was going to tell the story. The Indians hold the owl in great, he's almost revered because he's so wise. He has the wisdom. And the owl was going to bed one night. As the story goes, there was a little man, Indian man, was also going to go to bed, and he spoke to his wife. Her name was Mary. And the way you say it is Mary is Mani. Mani. Kukuku na kusa. That is to say, Mary, are you afraid of the owl? And she said, golly, no, I'm not afraid. Gosawi Nigo. Well, I'm afraid of him, said the little man. Her husband. Anitash. Why? Ginondwa Sinungo. I heard the owl today. His wife said, I'm Scott Killer. What did he say? Well, he almost said, the owl sang. Be to possession, nestation. That is to say, he said to his wife, Mrs. Howard, hold the blanket over me a little bit. My butt is cold. So, those were the little stories that they said that owl would talk to anybody. And we were told that we could even talk with the trees, especially the pine. But I was never able to do that in my life. And but we've had great amusing times. And we have known a great love, but also great sorrow. You take here in our community, Green Sky, Susan Lake. In their benevolent attitude toward other people, the Indians have never refused burial to anyone whose families or whose people couldn't find a place for them to be buried. There are Civil War veterans buried at Green Sky Hill. There are any number of prominent Indian people who had positions in the Indian society. There is one Japanese buried there, and one black man. That black man's last name was Swan. Rather unusual name for a black man. But I guess maybe there are black swans, I don't know. But anyway, it was during the Civil War, and the North had organized a way in which the Southern black people could escape. They call it the Black Railroad or something. Underground railroad for people to escape into the North. Well, a delegation of people arrived up here in the early days, and around probably the early 1860s, and attended Green Sky Hill. They came there to church, and a man had left his family behind in the South, and one day he received word that the balance of his family had arrived and were along the shores there at Grand Traverse Bay in Antrim County. And this black man, there was a path through the wilderness to that area. And this black man immediately left to meet his wife and children. And it was in the summertime. It was very, very hot. Well, he came onto a house of early settlers, of white people, and he went to the house and asked for a drink of water. And the man who lived there got up and went into the house to get the water. And when he came out, he had a gun and shot that black man and killed him right there in his yard. Well, the Indians at Green Sky Hill received word of this tragedy, and there immediately got into their canoes and went down there and brought his body back to Green Sky Hill and gave him a decent Christian burial, and his remains are there. And we have a letter dating at that time, I don't remember the exact date, but it was from his wife stating how thankful she was that the Indians were so kind to her. And she spoke of the Indian women of the church after they arrived, and she was a widow with children, how they came and brought her fish and soup and things like that to tide her over. So that is one of the kind acts the Green Sky Hill has performed over the years. And it continues to do things that are good and beautiful. We now have a large dining room which would accommodate and satisfy anyone, not lacking the elegant touch even. It would comfortably seat about 200 people. A beautiful fireplace, and it's just across the way from the old log church. We had the dinner there, the first one of the year, this past Saturday. And I attended, it was very, very good. And it's open to the public. The building is there for the convenience of people who would rent it for receptions or dinners, weddings or whatever. And not only for Indians, but for everyone. Any more questions? Yes?
Jay, the history of Green Sky Hill, the church itself, and things that happened, like marriages, people being buried, weddings, things like that. The archives of the church and the written history, where is that?
Have been lost. We had such prominent names as these great artists painted for the Saturday Evening Post.
Norman Rockwell.
Norman Rockwell was in that book. And Madame Schumann-Heink of the opera, she sang here at Bayview many years ago. She did gone, of course. She was a German opera star. And she came to Bayview to sing, and then visited with us. We had a delegation of 12 businessmen from Japan who came to Green Sky Hill. And they were very reverent. They took off their shoes and left them at the top, which is their custom, of course, but a bit unusual for us. I would like to be able to remember so many of the things that have taken place at Green Sky Hill. There is a lake there. It is called Susan Lake. And it is in memory of Susan Green Sky, the wife of Peter Green Sky, who was the founder of the church. And their remains are there. And we have any number of people who I think maybe this summer might want to try and stay out there some afternoons. It's surprising the number of people who stop there during the summertime. And we have kept up with the times, and the church has been redecorated, and it's the floors are carpeted, and the walls are paneled, and one thing and another, and to harmonize with logs outdoors. Anyone else?
I believe that you were, I listened to you talk, the gentleman that took us down there when I was there one time before. And you told us when we went through the woods, the bugs would be out, cut a little piece of fern or a twig.
Yeah, oh yes, yes.
Swing it around your head to keep the mosquitoes away.
The Egyptians have regular sticks with horsehair, and they just go like that all the time, like a horse. Off the bugs.
When are your dinners? The first or second Saturday or something like that?
It will be announced, but I think probably in September. Whether they will have any in between, I just don't know. But those dinners are really a social event of the year, judging by the number of people who come from here, Bayview, and the surrounding area. We have served about over 300 dinners. And now that we have a larger facility, it's even better. We can even serve faster. But they do serve good food. If you've eaten there, I guess you know.
I never got to the dinner. No, I've heard about it. Susan, Green Sky, and Peter, how many children did they have? And do they have any living descendants, or did their family?
Yes,
Here.
but they're not around here, are they? if they are there, if they have any living descendants there live in Minnesota. But no, there's none left here that I know of. George Greenstein, Peter Greenstein, but he had a son named George who lived here for many years with us in short. But they're both gone, he and his wife. And they had children. If any of you are maybe Petoskey people, maybe you knew the Showman, Bud Showman. He had 2 boys that were school age, but they're all gone. The youngsters are gone too. So that's about all I know of their immediate family. My family, all of her, I don't know how much British, we have more of a British name than that. But the story goes, I'll tell you, whether it's true or not, I don't know. It could be true. My grandmother was converted to the Christian faith, the Roman Church, the Catholic Church, because the Jesuit monks were here first. And she was born in Beaver Island. And they did start a church over there, but no church building. But they had a church in McNile. Well, the devout Indians, with weather permitting, would start out on Saturday afternoon and sail and go across to St. Ignace to be there in time for church on Sunday. Well, at the same time, there were a lot of Europeans who were here either running away from military service or running away from debts or one thing or another in their homeland, and were here in Michigan. Well, John Oliver arrived here in 1850, and he attended that church. He was bored to death. There was no social life for these young men, so they would go to church with the Indian people. Well, I know, when I saw her, she was already old, but you could see the great beauty that she must have had when she was a young girl. She was 18 years old when she attended that church. My grandmother. Well, the two apparently had the knowing glance of wanting to meet. So they met there at St. Ignace. And in time, my grandmother took him home with her to Beaver Island, St. James, John Oliver, and married him, and produced my father and 2 of his sisters, so 3 of the Olivers. And then in time, my mother married Joseph Oliver, and then I'm the oldest of the Olivers. There were 4 of us. That's the history of my name. And John Oliver, had relatives over here at Harvard Springs, one thing and another. And but anyway, with a name like that, why you have to explain sometimes. But he became and lived the way of the Indian people, fishing, hunting, and lumbering, things like that at St. James. and that's where he died.
Do you have children? Do you?
Two boys, yeah. Yeah.
When you went to that school, were you allowed to go home to see your parents?
Did you have the money? Yes. But you have to stay there 3 years if you couldn't afford to get on the train and go home. And in those days, I thought that Mount Pleasant was the end of the world.
How old were you?
I was 10 years old. And that was military training. And some of those non-commissioned officers were so cruel and mean, you know. They flogged children there even. That's a matter of record. So the government finally realized that it was not good. So they were all closed. I guess there might be some, a few of them out there on the different. Way of studying. I think most of them are something like a junior college or high school. That's all we, and that's the only one I know.
I think Carlisle was.
Oh, no, that's called
Land Road.
Andrew, that's our open.
I think so.
Yeah.
But they don't even take kids with disciplinary problems. They like, when you come there, they want you to learn.
If you don't learn, you'll be disciplined.
Now, the Holy Childhood Schools thing was not set up in the way that Mount Pleasant system was it? It was more of a...
It was private. But I think the government, the United States, because of the Indian children, it was subsidized for a number of years. And that, when that ceased, or they gradually had to because they couldn't afford it. Unless, you know, of course, the church is wealthy, all right, but for some reason or other, they're closed too, to board, I guess you go to school.
Right. So they did board the
Yes,
children at
yes,
the
yes,
same.
yes, yes. Well, are there any more questions, or is there anything else you would like to know? Yes.
Jay, are you keeping a record of your memoirs? Everybody thinks.
Not really. I helped with that book the way it was, the way it happened. Have you read it? That took 2 years. Because I did most of the language. And it wasn't hard for me. We played with French children when we were small, and they had the problem we had. Their parents and grandparents couldn't speak very good English, so they spoke French. And there was no great problem. And many of our terms, like you hear Indian people say the Jew, you hear say that, don't you? That means good morning, same as it did in French. And some of the other terms, French terms that we don't have comparable words, so we use French. I know one handkerchief, mouchoir, that's in French, and also in mouchoir. I was very interested and disappointed. You know, I have never had what you might call a profound Christian experience like so many people have. And when I went over to Palestine and saw great throngs of Muslim people who dress with long shroud clothes and very noisy, and there are only few places there. The Avenue of Sorrows is called the Via Dolorosa, the Stations of the Cross. They're still there. And the Franciscan monks of the Catholic Church, they are the caretakers of these holy shrines, and also the Garden of Gethsemane and other areas there pertaining to Jesus. And it's very hard to believe just where you are. And like I say, I hadn't had this Christian experience of profound. I was Christian, and it was hard, but judging by the way that people act. The first thing that you notice when you get there in the business places in the ancient section behind the wall is they have fresh meat, lamb mostly, flies just black, that's what they have there. Open markets, and it's not what it used to, what you would think. But on the other hand, you see some of the most exotic buildings in the modern parts of the city in Jerusalem, with light blue tile, glazed tile buildings, generally domes and things like the mosques of the East. And it's a sight to see. But I dare say if Jerusalem were in the United States, we'd probably do the same thing, capitalize on it. Anyone else? Yes.
I just wanted to say too that Marge Green Sky married Bill Mashiki, and they had 4 children. Those 4 Mashiki children are Green Skies.
Marge Green Sky.
I don't know descendants of Green Skies.
Well, she's buried in Green Sky Hill.
Yeah, she's buried.
Yes. Yes.
Those kids are middle-aged.
Yes, I think I know who you mean. Yeah. It was her family, her mother and father, her father was the great grandson of Peter Greensky, the founder. I think this book, the way it happened, that tells about that.
One of their daughters named Susan.
Susan. Anyone else? Well, I don't know. I suppose since this is an impromptu visit, and one thing I know that you're interested in, how would it be if it's not traditional, but maybe proper, if I close and repeat the memorable words of Jesus, and as it was translated at Toronto in 1847, the Lord's Prayer. Okay. Nusnang ishpening ai Manu tak chuthoin shkabekishne kazu Durmauern der Beschnum gewähren und schwabert am Aki der Schule des Binnen. Missionang snudishka vergenichgang, ja abwen schnangen batage, zwebzirnenanen. Is abwen mata ikwe, en adjududag edje. De geronische kanker makwatagan dalsunim, ne pagamushnang das onje ama, jai ilish. Geen mag de bandaan, Ogemauen, Ske Elzuen, Geb Shigan Dalzuen, Gagnik, and Penagagna, Kana. You are.
I do need you for a few minutes.